Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity
and by pelvic health professionals. Every yoga student you work with has a pelvis, a pelvic floor, and many of them might be dealing with pelvic health issues at some point in their life and not telling you as their yoga teacher. Yoga combined with pelvic health awareness and education is so powerful, and that's what's needed for those students who have questions about how their pelvis works. If you want to be connected with worldwide pelvic health experts and learn the most up-to-date information, check out pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And because you are a podcast listener and you are only going to hear this right here, I have a gift for you. You can use the coupon code all the way up until the end of 2021 to get a free month of access. This is a very limited thing, so the coupon code is CONNECTED2021. And if you forget, just go back to the show notes for today's episode over at theconnectedyogateacher.com. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm a Canadian who is learning more about what it means when you live on Indigenous land. So I live on Anishinaabeg, Odawa, and Mississauga land because all of my ancestors came here as immigrants from Ireland, England, Scotland, and Germany. Also, I've been sharing on the podcast random facts about me. I have a little list that I add to and I created. And I think it's such divine timing because as this episode goes out today, it's my brother's birthday. Shout out to Conrad, who's my favorite brother. I tell him that all the time. He's my only brother. And when I call him, I tell him, it's your favorite sister. Shout out to Conrad. Happy birthday to Conrad. He's one of my best friends, and I'm really lucky to have that in my life. So shout out to him. And a random fact that involves Conrad is when we were younger, I used to make him play school on our days off. I used to make him sit down and do homework, and I was going to be the teacher. And if you're thinking, wow, Shannon sounds really bossy. Well, all you have to do is ask my brother to know that's very true. I still like to tell him what to do. We joke about it. He put up with me for a lot of years. And sometimes he would just lose it and say, I don't want to play school on my days off. What else about me? I'm a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, podcaster, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And this podcast was created for you, the yoga teacher, so that each and every week you can feel connected to the information and inspiration that's going to support you on the tough days, on the days when tech questions come up, when yoga philosophy questions come up, and on the days as you're building this yoga business for yourself and for the community around you. I want to take a little moment here to check in and ask, how are you doing today? And then I want to ask, how are you really doing? Like, let's pause for a moment and really check in. We can both do this at the same time. Whatever you are doing, let's find a breath here together. And then ask yourself, how am I really doing today? Today's interview is here for you anytime you are feeling tired, worn down, angry, struggling to forgive or to be forgiven, or when you're ready to take on new challenges and you want to gather your energy in this sustainable way going forward. And I want to share a little bit and just be very transparent here with you. It's moving into fall here as I record this today. And this season, yes, is one of my favorites. I love that we get to wear sweaters and drink warm tea and things feel cozy and The fall colors are out and the garden is being harvested. And I also, if you've gotten to know me at all, you know that I dread what is coming next. Cold winter. I naturally want to hibernate and I fight against this, and sometimes I feel guilty. And this year, I feel like there's an added layer for me personally. I think it's the pandemic on top of a lot of loss for my family and myself in the last couple of years. And I've talked a little bit about this on the podcast, and parts of this I'm still processing. And in those times, I don't share everything. I don't share everything on social media. I don't share everything on the podcast. I would tell you to do the same. You don't have to share things until you've really processed it. I've also been talking more on the podcast of my own social justice work and how I feel like this is part of my yoga off the mat. And so all of this is bubbling around inside of me. I did a check-in before I hit record here, and I wanted to share parts of this with you because in this interview with Jacoby today, I share that my anger has been rising up and how that doesn't feel very quote-unquote yogic. And Jacoby shared so much wisdom. It was absolutely soothing to my entire being, and that is why I'm really excited and I can't wait to share this with you. This interview and the book, I'm just so grateful for this. I feel like it was an absolute gift at a time where I really needed it. So if you are in a place of struggle or pressure or just kind of feeling like, I'm not really sure, I would say pause this podcast and order Jacoby's book. But wait one moment before you pause the podcast. Jacoby's publicist, I want to give a huge shout out to Emily Shapiro at North Atlantic Books. Emily has been above and beyond helpful and generous to us as listeners and also as we were organizing things behind the scenes for this interview. They have offered all of our connected yoga teachers a 30% discount. That's a big discount for a book on Jacoby's book. And you can use the code CONNECTED when you check out. We'll put all of the details and links in our show notes so you can head on over to theconnectedyogateacher.com/246. And just a note, this offer is valid. This coupon code is valid for a month from when today's episode goes out. So a month from November the 15th. So yeah, pause now, go order the book, or maybe you want to have a listen, get to know Jacoby and their wisdom, and then order the book afterwards. Because honestly, connected yoga teachers, this book is unbelievable. If you are caring for yourself, for others, for the planet, this book can really help to sustain you. Also, if you're listening in real time, there's a book launch party tonight, November 15th, 2021. And then next week, the book releases November the 23rd. I cannot wait to go to the book launch party. I'm going to stay up late to do that here in Eastern time. Not too late, but in my books, in my hibernating time, a bit late. And I cannot wait to hold the physical copy of the book. I'm so glad that I got to read an advance copy, and I don't often like to do that on my computer, but I'm so glad that I did. Now, before we dive in and meet Jacoby, I want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, Schedulicity.
Hey there, connected yoga teachers. This is Mickey with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Human beings are not machines. We can only endure so much before we need a break. Yoga teachers treat both the physical and mental well-being of their clients, and that can sometimes take its own mental and emotional toll. When you need a break, Schedulicity makes it easy to create a block of personal time. Carve out a little bit of time for yourself and rest assured that it will be protected in your schedule. Online clients will not know that you're taking a break. They'll only see the times that you are available, so you can practice self-care and avoid burnout.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity, for bringing us today's episode. And Connected Yoga Teachers, if you want to check out Schedulicity, or if you are an existing customer of theirs, they're giving away 2 months of free access if you use the code CYT2months. We'll make sure that that's in our show notes over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/246. Also, I want to give a huge shout out of thank you to Laura from Germany, who left a review for the podcast. We love to get reviews. You can do that from any one of our show notes pages. There's a button there to leave a review. Laura says, "Hi Shannon, this is Laura. Right now I'm doing my 200-hour yoga teacher training, and I'm so glad that I found your podcast with all this valuable information. I learned something new in every episode. Love from Germany." Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Laura, for taking the time to leave a review. I want to hear an update now. How are things going with the yoga teacher training? Are you finished? What other questions do you have as a new yoga teacher? How are things going? So many questions. So thank you for leaving this review. Alrighty, Connected Yoga Teachers, I am so excited to introduce you to Jacoby Ballard, who is a social justice educator, yoga teacher in Salt Lake City, Utah, and who is known for their playfulness, heart opening, and commitment to change from the inside out. Jacoby is a yoga teacher with 20 years of experience who leads workshops, retreats, teacher trainings, teaches at conferences, and who runs a mentorship program. And you'll hear me ask Jacoby about this. It's specifically for yoga teachers, and we talk about it at the end of today's interview. In 2008, Jacoby co-founded Third Root Community Health Center in Brooklyn to work at the nexus of healing and social justice. Since 2006, Jacoby has taught queer and trans yoga, a space for queer folks to unfurl and cultivate resilience. And Jacoby received Yoga Journal's Game Changer Award in 2014 and Good Karma Award in 2016, and an award by Reclamation Ventures in 2021. Jacoby has taught in schools, hospitals, nonprofit, and business offices, a maximum security prison, we talk about that in today's episode, a recovery center, a cancer center, LGBTQ centers, gyms, veteran center, and yoga studios. They lead workshops and trainings around the country on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and consult in DEI for yoga and meditation organizations. As I said earlier, Jacoby is also an author. A Queer Dharma, Yoga and Meditations for Liberation is their book that is being released right after this podcast is going out. So whenever you are listening to this, you can either pre-order the book or order the book. I highly recommend this book. Let's learn how Jacoby weaves yoga, Buddhism, and all of these teachings into the day-to-day challenges. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Jacoby. It's so great to have you here today.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Tell our listeners about the work that you do, who you do it for, and anything else that you'd like us to know about you.
I've been doing work at the intersection of yoga and Buddhist practice and social justice, which often intersects with trauma, for about 20 years. And I have been teaching queer trans yoga since 2006 as a weekly class. And since the pandemic, it's been an online weekly class, which has been great to welcome in queer folks from all over the world. And doing that work, creating an affinity space starting back in 2006, there was a lot of pushback around it. And now it's like fairly common practice that there's BIPOC spaces and there's queer spaces and there's disabled people spaces and fat spaces. So that's another thing that I do. And then trying to create more sustainability and less burnout among activists who are doing really huge change work in our world.
That's amazing. I really love this sustainability. And I'm excited because we're going to chat about anger and forgiveness. And I think that's all wrapped up, like how we can make this a sustainable part of taking yoga off the mat. I also want to shout out your work around educating us inside of pelvic health professionals around trans pregnancy. I feel like it was such an empowering hour of really looking at caring for individuals who are coming to us around yoga and pelvic health education. So thank you so much for that as well.
Yeah, totally. It's great to just get more people on our side, More people educated means there's more trans people that can be served.
Yeah, a key takeaway in that for me was you were really about like looking at the individual in front of you, and we were talking about language, and that was really powerful. So thank you for that. I want to dig right in, and I don't know if it's like selfishly because this is the space I've been in for a while, but we've been looking as a collective, like the Connected Yoga Teacher listeners, yoga teachers, the world maybe, around social justice issues, I think more in the last couple of years than I've seen in my lifetime anyway. And in that, I noticed that I am like scrolling social media or, just talking to someone, and I just get so angry that there's still just not just basic human rights for everyone. Like I can get really wound up, really angry, and post something or say something or just internally feeling like maybe this isn't yoga. Maybe this isn't, because I know you also talk about Buddhism in your book. Maybe this isn't spiritual. Maybe I shouldn't be so angry. I should just be calm and happy all of the time. What are your thoughts on that?
We need to go through the anger. Anger is a very human emotion, and if we dismiss it or deny it or repress it, then it's going to come out in all the wrong places and probably all over those that we care about most in our lives. So I think as practitioners, part of our svadhyaya practice is to look inside, have self-study, and some of that can be like study the anger. I also see anger as like kind of a surface emotion that's like a protector of something that's sacred and something that's precious that's been harassed or assaulted or destroyed. So anger often covers over heartbreak or exhaustion or fear. But if we don't look at the anger first, then we can't get to the heartbreak, the fear, the exhaustion. And if we can't get there, then like we can't heal, right? We can't get to the other side. We can't take in the wisdom that the anger is offering. I think of anger as incredibly wise and essential to social justice work, that it's like telling us there's something wrong here. Like, no, innocent people in Afghanistan should not be killed right now. No, or whatever the thing is. And so like our nervous systems get angry first, because then we're filled with adrenaline, and then we're like able to like fight or flee, which is important when something as precious is in danger. And if we don't go deeper than that to look at the anger, then it's going to come out in our collaborations, come out in our relationships, come out in our institutions and projects.
I appreciate that you talked about the nervous system and this fear, flight, fight response that we have, because in your book you talk about how to discharge that. So can you let us know some healthy ways? Because we all know the ways where we just like react at someone and maybe freak out at them, and that might feel really good in the moment. But maybe it's not a helpful way. Like, how can we discharge that anger?
One of the Buddhist practices around right speech is to not speak in anger. And the reason for that is because the human nervous system responds to body language and facial expression and tone of voice so much quicker than what is actually being said. So if you're screaming at me, Shannon, and you're saying something that's totally on point, it's going to go right through me, or it's going to bounce off of the armor that I put up in front of me. It's just like not going to land. So within Buddhist practice, it's not a bypass. It's more just like treating your anger with care. Like there's something important here that Shannon needs to tell me, and for it to land, like we need to discharge that energy so that it's not coming out as a punch, as an attack, as harsh speech. So moving that energy, some of the ways, there's countless ways. Asana, vigorous asana can be a way, or for me, running is the foremost thing that I turn to just like exhaust my body, to really let it move through me and move through my legs that like want to flee any given heartbreak or injustice. Boxing, a lot of indigenous cultures have practices of stomping, drumming, going to a batting cage, any kind of like physical movement that any of our bodies, whatever the capacity of the body is, that we can do. Or Sean Corn gave me a task, an assignment when I was teaching in New York, and my queer community there was going through a lot. She was like, you can't hold this all by yourself. I need you to go up onto your rooftop in Brooklyn every day and scream.
Oh my goodness. If any of our listeners are like, oh, I live in Brooklyn, and that must have been what that was.
Totally. I mean, it's not abnormal in Brooklyn to just like hear whatever sounds coming out. So at first I was a little self-conscious, and then I was just like, well, there's like grunts and like sirens and car alarm. Like, what's a scream? That's fine.
Exactly. Oh, this is interesting hearing you say that, because there are so many times where I've told my kids, like, all right, those are outside voices, get outside. And I did let them scream their heads off outside. But we do suppress this so much. Like, we suppress anger. You're saying, like, in Buddhism, there is this, like, let's not use this harsh communication to each other. But overall in society, it's like, don't be angry. If we're having a temper tantrum as a toddler, it is not really celebrated in a lot of places. So what are your thoughts on how we can maybe encourage that if we have young kids or upset adults in our life?
Well, I have a toddler, so I see a lot of big emotions moving through his body a lot. I just encourage him to get it out. We've gotten him some chewing jewelry, like a little bracelet that he wears and a necklace that he wears, because a lot of energy comes through his mouth. And when he's angry, he tends to bite. And so we're trying to coach him. They're like, rather than like biting my shoulder or biting someone's hand, to bite the chewing jewelry. So the energy itself is not vilified. It's more just like, where do you direct this? And what is the appropriate avenue to express it? Because, if we told him, like, you can't do that, you can't feel that, then that shames and isolates him. And then, we see this, especially, like, I'm very conscious of this, of raising a young, perhaps presumably boy child. I don't know. He hasn't told us yet. But a lot of boys and men have been told to suppress any kind of emotion, and that anger is the only emotion that can be expressed for them. And there's so much energy behind it, because all of their emotions have to be channeled into this one pathway, and it just so denies their holistic being and their humanity. So when we shame and isolate even adults for their anger, then that gets us nowhere. Like, it's going to come out sideways. One of my students said the other day in class when we were talking about anger that she learned from someone in an addiction recovery facility that if she was like, be direct with me or else it's going to come out through the side of my neck. Which just seems so clear. Like, we all have felt that when it comes out the side of our necks.
Yep. I appreciate that you brought in parenting to this, because as a parent, I think this is something we can really learn from, watching kids do this, shake something off. And also, you call attention to this in your book. This is what animals do, and this discharging. And it's making me think now of when the murder of George Floyd happened and people were really angry. I remember hearing some people say, I can't listen to this. This person is too angry. This person's too upset. And so it's like I can see both sides of it. I can see exactly what you were saying about how we take in the message. It's easier when someone's not angry. So what do we do when we have that reaction pop up, like, I can't listen to this. This person's too angry.
I mean, in one way, that's just your nervous system doing what the human nervous system does. And so that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And certain people's anger has been like dismissed or pushed aside, especially communities of color. So I think for me, knowing that there's wisdom in any anger, and that there's heartbreak, exhaustion, and fear underneath the rage, that I try to like cue into that, right? Like everyone that was outraged last summer, it's because like this is too many. This has gone on for too long. Like we cannot continue to have our siblings, our parents, our children killed and slaughtered. Like we can't live like this. Right? So there's wisdom and there's like urgency there, because it's not just the incident of George Floyd, right? It's like like hundreds of thousands, millions before that, and then the many that have continued since then too. So trying to like cue into like what is going on, and whether that's like also in like a personal relationship, right? Like a lot of my relationships with folks of color last year were frayed just because there was so much that they were holding. And so it was a lot of work for me to like stay grounded, to like understand like I've been in anti-racism for 20 years. This is like actually, their rage is like maybe somewhat about me, maybe about the thing I did or didn't do, but it's also just like their cultural exhaustion and from the burden of racism.
In your book, you also talked about a practice that you did, I think for a couple of years, you said, correct me if I'm wrong, of this calendar of injustices that happen, and they were racial injustices, so lynchings or murders like every day. And you brought that into your daily practice. And it made me think right away, oh my gosh, so many of us, and I'll just speak for myself, oftentimes you want your, let's light a candle and make the room look nice and soft, and let's really downregulate the nervous system. So talk to us about what your experience was with that and what your goal was, or the balance of like taking care of ourselves in our self-practice and then also being aware of what's happening in the world.
One of my teachers, Swami Jayadevi Bhagavati in Atlanta, says, "What does your heart break into?" Which to me is kind of encouragement and letting your heart break, because there's possibility and more expansion on the other side. And, there's days when we can like really turn our hearts towards the sorrows and struggles and injustices of our world. And there's other days where we're just exhausted and we can't. But I made it, it's a really small thing to just like open up the calendar and be like, okay, January 22nd, what happened today? And then like see the person's name, the location, what happened, what is known about it, and to just hold that. It felt so important that like that's not in my bones in the way that it is in the bones and blood of my comrades of color and my beloveds who are folks of color. And so that was a way that like I could take it in and like allow it to break my heart and move through me. And then on the other side of the heartbreak for me is a further commitment to racial justice, right? Like if I know like on this day some terror occurred in Alabama or in Louisiana or in New York or wherever, right? Because it happens everywhere. Then I can use that as fuel to like keep showing up, to like call my senator again, or go to the protest again, or advocate in my kids' school for a different kind of celebration of Black History Month or whatever it is, but to like keep on keeping on and to not let myself off the hook, because as a white person, I could totally turn away from racial injustice. I mean, it would sever relationships that I have with my beloveds, certainly, but my life wouldn't be threatened if I turn away, and people of color just can't do that. And so I feel like it puts myself in fellowship with my beloveds and the people that I care about.
This really made me think about what our practice really is. And you talk also in your book about your practice being this way of really like having this daily routine and having these things that really enable you to show up. So talk about that as well, in terms of how it's not just this selfish thing that we're doing. We're not just doing this to, I don't know, reach enlightenment or something. We're also doing it for our communities and our loved ones, you had said in your book. Tell us about that.
Yeah. The Buddhist idea of a bodhisattva is the person who refuses to become enlightened until everyone is enlightened. And so I think of some of these practices as the same way, to like continue to do what each of us need to do to be as resource as we can on any given day, and to do that as like regular maintenance, not just take a day off when like everything's falling apart, but to like, for me, like taking a day off regularly, like a day that I would usually be working at least once a month, is really important, so that I can just like breathe and have expansion, and it actually fuels the work. It doesn't take away from the work, because I'm so much more creative and imaginative if I just have more space. But it can't end there. And I think there can be, amongst white Buddhist practitioners and white yoga practitioners, a tendency to like use our practice to separate from the world and turn away from the world. And I've been in so many retreat spaces where it's like, we're going to leave all that stuff out there. And so many of us don't have that option. Like, I can't leave transphobia out the door. It's in any space that I'm in. And it's more visible, certainly, if there's a trans person in that transphobic space. But it's inevitably there. In the same way that, you know, racism is the air we breathe. Ableism is what we swallow every day. So having the daily practices allows me to like be grounded in myself, remember my commitments, remember my purpose, and then turn back towards whatever is calling my attention on a given day, to be as skillful as I can and aware of what I need to work on and where my vulnerabilities are and where I feel like totally skilled and equipped to deal with a given situation.
What does your self-practice look like then when you are a parent of a toddler, you know, doing work, just wrote a book? Like, I feel like, how do you fit that in, and what does it look like?
It can be really small things, even like getting up a few minutes before my kid and like having moments alone in the bathroom to like wake up feels like self-care, where I'm just with myself and not with him too. Making time to run every week. I go running at least 3 times a week, do asana pretty regularly. My meditation practice has certainly suffered, my like formal on the cushion meditation practice, but I've also tried to summon that practice like when I'm reading books with him, or when I'm singing songs with him, or certainly we walk our dog every day, him and I together, and it often feels like a walking meditation, specifically because he's a toddler and just like learning about the world. Like, this is the first autumn that he's aware of the change of the seasons. And he's like, look, Papa, another leaf fell. And he's so excited and so aware and just like noticing it all. Like, that's what we're trying to do on the cushion. So I just go for a walk with him. I think it's part of decentering the notion of like meditation is just being on the cushion, or yoga is only being asana, that our practice is hopefully expanding into like every moment of every day. And then I think it's also important for my partner and I to have like time together, especially at the end of the day, even if it's just like laying in bed together for a few minutes before we turn the lights out. We have a practice of saying gratitudes to each other every night, so that like that's the last thing that we say. And then trying to like, my bedtime has become like very non-negotiable. Last night we had friends over and they stayed till 10:20 at night, and I was like, y'all, I gotta go to bed because I'll be up by 6:20. And so I think parenting has made my self-care, like, set certain boundaries around my self-care, that's like, this has to happen now. It can't just be fit in just like some other part of the day, because there's not going to be time for that with a toddler.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I was thinking back to when I raised my kids mostly on my own, even when I lived with their dad. And my non-negotiable was basically by 7 p.m., I want everyone to be in bed. You can keep your lights on as long as you want reading. But I need this like 7 p.m. It's like, why? I might be doing the dishes, but I'm going to do it by myself. And so I would be this really friendly mom up until 7 p.m. And then I'd just be like, what are you doing downstairs? Be like a switch. So they knew, okay, she's really fun all day, but after 7, she's not. And it's amazing because my kids really still love. We tease my daughter. She's 16 and she's like, okay, I have to get going home. My bedtime is 8 o'clock. That's not normal 16-year-old behavior, I don't think, or it wasn't in my day.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much to be said for like sleep and that routine and just knowing, okay, Every once in a while, we can have friends over. I'm glad that you did, but you're like, okay, this has to end now.
Yep.
I would love it if you would read a piece from your book here, and it's completely up to you if you want to or not. I felt like this really summarized things. This is page 27 to 28. Yeah, do you want to read this for us?
Sure. Ultimately, it is my spiritual work to change how I relate to the hate, violence, and injustice in the world. I must create boundaries that protect me from internalizing harm, while practicing compassion that allows me to remain sensitive to suffering around the world and in my own life. Holding on to anger and rage literally makes us unhealthy and creates harm in our lives, self-harm, harm of loved ones in our words and actions, and inevitably harm that manifests in our political work. We need to create space to attend to the grief, to move the energy of anger out, and then show up with wisdom and commitment. Anger tells us, pay attention. Anger gives us the energy to do something, for something precious is being killed, injured, threatened, tarnished, taken, abused, polluted, appropriated, or harmed. Take note of the anger's energy and release it before speaking or acting. Otherwise, its fire may know no bounds and may hurt those close and nearby. For me, after the heat in my body has passed, after my jaw has loosened, after deep breaths are again easy to access, after the righteous story that I created and rehearsed in my mind has dissipated, then I speak. Then I do the change work. I make the call. I show up at the rally. I write the article. I raise my hand in a training. We can shift how we relate to violence and injustice while still doing everything we can to counteract it and build a better world. We need that world to exist with us in it, still alive, the change makers and visionaries, healthy and vital. So how we do the work really matters. We want to do our social justice work in a way that is reparative, restorative, revitalizing, so that we're not worn out with broken hearts and broken bodies when the world we want arrives.
So good. So good. Oh my gosh. I feel like I could keep reading this. Like I probably need this somewhere where I can see it every day. There's a lot in this. There's a lot in your book. What was this like to write?
It was many years. It came about initially from reactions around my queer and trans yoga class of people being like, "Isn't that exclusive? Shouldn't we all be together? Why are you creating further separation?" So it began as a response to that, and then as the heart teachings became more a part of my life, the practices of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Then I started writing about that and teaching about that. I have a lot of stories of working with my students through that as well in various settings. And then inevitably, when I teach those 4 heart practices, what comes up is letting go and anger and forgiveness. So I had to write about those as well. And then the other part of my book, Queering Yoga, is kind of political analysis about the yoga industry, critique of cultural appropriation and capitalism, and how it perpetuates harmful patterns within yoga spaces, and then some examples of projects that are trying to do it differently and create space for different communities, which is really important to not just have critique, but also have models that we can live into and follow in the footsteps of and expand. And that felt like that stuff has been burning inside of me. It's just driving me nuts for the 2 decades that I've been teaching. And I also know that as a white yoga teacher of a tradition that I'm not ancestrally connected to, and as an anti-racist activist, I couldn't write about yoga without writing about cultural appropriation. And it's become a bigger conversation in the last couple of years, but I started, doing work around this 10, 12 years ago. And there's so much resistance of how dare you tell us how we should decorate our yoga studio, or what yoga clothing should be sold or not sold. Who cares if there's an om on the butt? And there's actually a lot of people that care very deeply. Millions of them, a billion of them.
Right. What are some other examples of this, of like this thing that was really burning you, like that anger was coming up of, yes, you need to care about that. Can you think of some other examples for us to look for?
Yeah, yoga studios and just how we do yoga studios, where the studio owner makes most of the profit and yoga teachers are hustling and struggling. That needs to shift because the teachers are the asset there. Like the teaching, the wisdom, the product comes through us. And so if we're depleted and not resourced, then it's doing the whole lineage of yoga a disservice. It's not allowing us to teach as potently as we could be, and therefore detracting from what is popularly understood as yoga, right? People think of asana as yoga. I'm going to do yoga means you're going to do asana on a mat. And for me, doing yoga is like living my life.
Right.
So that's been burning. And the other part of yoga studios and sustainability is I have a really big question around yoga teacher trainings. It's a 200-hour model, and then there's advanced trainings that we can continue to take that I've taken. And one is that like we have so much responsibility as a yoga teacher in a room, right? Like we play the role of therapist and physical therapist and philosopher, sometimes DJ, choreographer. And it's a lot. It's a lot to do, and we only are required to have 200 hours of training, and that's just like that's terrible, given what's expected of us. And as someone who's been teaching yoga for 20 years, I know that like part of how I have sustained myself in some years of my teaching is to run a teacher training, right? Such a big part of experienced teachers' income. So it doesn't feel fair to cut that out. But if we're training thousands of teachers every year collectively through all of the yoga schools, then we're flooding the market with people with very low skill sets who then don't have the training to like be with someone with a hip replacement or a recent experience of trauma or an identity quite unlike theirs in the world. And so then people show up to the yoga room, they get harmed, and they're like, screw that, I'm out.
That's so important. And you're right, 200 hours, there's no way that we could fit everything in that we learn as experienced yoga teachers. And we're still continuing to learn. We have an episode coming out with Gabby where Gabby talked about, you know what, we need to just teach every yoga class like there is a non-binary or trans person in the class. That's what we need to be doing. And I mean, that's one aspect. We've had other podcasts that are about we need to be teaching like there is someone experiencing trauma in every single class. Mm-hmm. And you talk about this in your book of like how we're going to harm people. We are going to feel harm and we are going to harm other people as humans. This is both liberating and also I know that yoga teachers do not want to be doing that. We don't want someone to walk into our classes and we unintentionally or ignorantly say something that's harmful. You talked about how one yoga teacher made some comment about, well, blah, 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 if those of you who are pregnant, and like it was a laughing thing in the class. And as soon as I heard that in your book, I was like, I definitely could have done that in my early days as a yoga teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to reckon with. That like we're given a platform and a pedestal, and so the weight of our voice is going to be great, and we're also human at the same time, and so we're going to make mistakes and create harm. I think anticipating that, it's important to have mentorship of people who are a decade or more down the road from you that can kind of guide you, and also either through that mentor or just self-reflection to really know what are you up for, what are you equipped for, what is like part of your like growth space, but how can you access that growth without getting messy all over your students. And I think it can take like accountability partners with like other yoga teachers and like horizontal relationships, or from a mentor to be like, all right, I hear that you want to work with homeless people. This is what we need to do to get there. It's not something you can just like sign up for and do today, because there's trauma, there's injustice, there's histories of redlining and housing injustice. Like, there's a lot for you to deal with if that's who you want to teach. And I don't want to like say don't teach that. I just want you to approach a vulnerable population with so much care, knowing that you're going to make a mistake, but to like scale down the mistakes you're going to make because you're approaching it with so much care.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good example. I remember a local yoga teacher saying to me, I've just been asked to teach for the houseless shelter, and how do I do that? And I remember we had this discussion. I'm like, I don't think I'd say yes to it. I wouldn't be equipped. So in knowing that, that's really good. Not to think like, ooh, I want that opportunity and that one and that one. That's really good to know.
And now there's trainings for all of this.
Yes.
Like, go take a training with street yoga at a minimum. Go take a training with Halakori around trauma. Go take a training with Michelle Cassandra Johnson around race and racism. Set these benchmarks for yourself and then assess, now do I have some idea of what I'm doing in the room? Or do I still need to like shadow another teacher who's been doing this for years? Or teach in partnership, so that it's not just about me, it's about us holding space for a lot of us.
You wrote about in your book teaching in a prison, and this story of everyone writing down something that they're suffering with on a piece of paper. Do you want to talk about that? I think it's one of the most beautiful shares. Everyone needs to go and get the book to really get it, but do you want to talk to us about that as well?
Yeah, I often do this exercise that I learned from Kelly McGonigal at Stanford when I teach about compassion, which is just so beautiful. It always breaks people right open. So the practice is for everyone to anonymously write down on a slip of paper a great suffering in their life. And then they fold it up and put it in a basket, and they're asked to not put any like identifying factors. So they could say like, I killed my best friend, but not say like, I killed Stephen Johns, or, so then everyone puts it in a basket, and I mix it up, and then I give everyone another paper, and they make sure that it's not their own paper that they wrote on. And then we take a minute before they unfold them, and they just kind of hold it in their hands, knowing that they're holding someone's pain in their very hands, and just kind of sit. We've already worked with compassion at the point that I offered this workshop in the prison. It was an ongoing class. So we'd been working together for weeks to build up to this point where they could share their greatest vulnerability. And so we take that time, and then they unfold it, and they read it, and we sit in silence for about 5 minutes where they're just like holding what's written on this page. And some of the things that are written are like my addiction, or my mom passed while I was imprisoned, or the mother of my children has refused to let me have contact with my children. Different things like that. And then after they've read it and held it individually, we go around and everyone reads it out loud, what's on the page. And then we take a breath with each of it. So it's not like rapid fire, but we're like really present with it. And then at the end, we just kind of sit for a few minutes in meditation with compassion, of just knowing that any room that we walk into in this world has this depth of suffering. And then I asked for their reflections on it in the prison. And one man said that the page that he got was addiction was someone's greatest suffering. And this guy was incarcerated for selling heroin. And he says, he's like, this is the paper I should have gotten. And I didn't cause this person's addiction, but I did facilitate addiction in my community. And he said, and so for all of you and whoever's paper this is, I am so sorry. I get chills even now, like 5 years later, just telling the story. And then after that, after there's like reflections on like what the pain that they're holding is, then we do another round, and everyone goes through, and I ask them, given the suffering that you wrote, which you don't have to tell right now, but given the suffering that you put out, what do you think is the possible silver lining, or what wisdom have you gained because of that life experience that you never would have asked for? And so one person was like, I feel for all the fathers in the room separated from our children, and I know that you all, just like me, are doing everything you can to remain connected to your kids. And he was like, I wish every father in the world was doing everything they can in or out of prison to remain connected to their kids. And then another man raised his hand, and he's like, I wrote down that I killed someone and that I don't know if I'm ever going to see my freedom in this lifetime. And he was just like, kind of like pushing me off and a little bit sarcastic and like, what is the silver lining in that, man? And this young man who'd not been incarcerated for very long raised his hand, and he turned to the man, and like early on in a prison class, like everyone faces forward and you're not in relationship with each other because that's dangerous in a prison. But he turned his body to the other man who's 20 years older than him, and he's like, look at you, man. You've been taking every college course you can. You're more educated than most of us in this room. You do your work with diligence and you teach the younger men who come in here. And he's like, you're a possibility model. I know that I can make it through this because you're making it through this. And it was, I like never expected that man to say that. And the other student that was like grappling with never being able to see his freedom just broke down and cried. Just like being witnessed like that, and his goodness and his skills and his effort being witnessed was such a gift.
Wow, those are such powerful and moving stories. Thank you so much for sharing them, for writing about them, for facilitating that space, and really digging into all of this. I am so excited for our connected yoga teachers to read your book. Is there anything else where you thought, okay, after finishing this book, I just want to pass this on to yoga teachers. I really want them to have this one message. If they take in nothing else, this one thing would be great.
I think working with feedback, inviting feedback, and working with it really conscientiously is so important. In so many yoga and Dharma spaces, I've seen feedback come as critique, right? And that like I've seen so much fragility around it because the critique is often around racism or transphobia or ableism or anti-fat bias, ageism. And then people just get freaked out of like, oh shit, you saw my shadow side. I don't want to see my shadow side. You saw it. Now it's public. That didn't happen. No, no, no. And I want to invite us to shift into, wow, you just offered me something that I couldn't have seen myself. And you're entering into partnership with me. And maybe that it comes in really difficult packaging. Maybe it's really worded harshly. But thank goodness that you shared this with me. And to look at it, look at the feedback, like, is this true? And to like consider one's positionality. Like, if I'm a white person getting this feedback from a person of color, to like really look into like, what is true here and what, because of my positionality, have I missed about the world that this person is offering me up to see, and to then allow it to facilitate our own growth. As my colleague Nisha Ahuja says, this is an opportunity to love bigger. And then on the other side of it, to not give up on each other when we make a mistake, when we create harm. We're humans, we're bound to do that. But we push people out of social justice work and we push people out of spiritual practice through shame and isolation and blame. And instead, can we like go towards them and draw them in and listen to their pain? Because hurt people, right? So there's some suffering there to be with. And then therefore to like consider at what proximity can we be in relationship with each other. For some of us, that might mean teaching a training together, teaching a really intimate workshop together. And for some of us, it might just be like, yeah, we're friends on Facebook and like, that's about all I can handle. But to like consider the proximity at which you can love yourself and love the other person and not give up.
This is so good. I took furious notes while I was reading your book. I've not even looked over at my notes because I'm so engrossed in this conversation right now. And I feel like I could keep chatting with you. But really, I just encourage our listeners to grab the book. There's a lot in there. If you're feeling angry, if you're feeling uncomfortable with someone else's anger, if you're looking at how to forgive someone, if you want to really dig into this part of yoga that is making it a daily part of your life. I'm excited about this. Thank you so much for putting this work together, for continuing to do this in the world. And where can we find the book and where can we connect with you?
I encourage you to go to your local bookstore and find the book rather than supporting the big corporate mega stores. Or if you have to order online, IndieBound or bookshop.org are great independent sources. My website is jacobyballard.net. I'm going to be having a book launch party on November 15th, and I'll be leading a mentorship for yoga teachers in the new year. So that's another place to connect with me.
Oh, that's amazing. Tell us about your mentorship.
I've been running it for the last couple of years with really small kind of test cohorts, and it's going to be bigger this year, next year. But it's trying to fill in the gaps of yoga teacher trainings because 200 hours can't cover it all. And then also help people see like what are their gifts, what are their skill sets, and what is their dharma, what is their calling, what kind of work, what population do they want to teach to, and where is their most potent offering. So like helping them get there and like actually put it into action.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for doing that work. Thank you for today. This has been amazing.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Shannon.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Jacoby, for all that you have offered us today in this interview, also with the work of your book. Honestly, a lot of what I read before our interview and a lot of the things that you said during this have come back and really held me and supported me. So I'm so grateful for you for doing this work out in the world. Connected yoga teachers, I would love to hear from you. And I'm really excited that we even have an extra bonus for those of you who are in our Facebook group. If you're not there already, you can come on over and join. Just go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and the join button is right there on our website. We are going to open the discussion for those of you who have had a listen to this podcast right here. We're going to open that discussion up and ask for your key takeaways. And 3 people who comment in our Facebook group in that thread will be entered to win one of Jacoby's books. So this is super exciting. If you've already ordered one, not to worry, you can still enter and you can win one and give it away to a friend, or you could gift it to someone else in the Connected Yoga Teacher group. I'm just really excited that we can keep this conversation going. How can we deal with anger? How can we work on forgiveness? And what can we do to really take care of ourselves as we're doing yoga on our mat, as we're teaching yoga, and as we're taking yoga into our day-to-day life? Thank you so much for being here today, having a listen all the way to the end. That means a lot. I know that you have a lot of things on your plate as a human on this planet and as a yoga teacher sharing yoga out into the world. And so it means so much that you've spent some of that time today. Maybe you learned something new. Maybe you feel inspired to bring some of this into your own practice and into your own yoga spaces. Just thank you so much for being here. Also, thank you to our entire team, Suzanne, Crunch, Sinead, and Erica. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing each and every week behind the scenes. Connected yoga teachers, you know, if you've been listening at all, that I like to ask one question at the end of every episode. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?